Hello folks, welcome back to the Edupedia world, and I am Abhinay Gupta. So today again we'll continue with the topic, the Competition Act 2002, right? And we were dealing with Section 3. So what has Section 3 got to say? Section 3 basically deals with the anti-competitive agreement. We have seen what anti-competitive agreement is and what deemed anti-competitive agreements are. Right, and we have also seen the other anti-competitive agreements, but we did not define it in the previous class. Right, so today in this lecture we would just go briefly through the revision of what we did in the previous class, and then we'll go on to explain the other anti-competitive agreements and then discuss the questions. Right, so basically what are anti-competitive agreements? We have discussed it is an agreement between an enterprise or association of enterprise or person or association of person that has an adverse effect on the market, adverse effect on the competition specifically, right? So those kinds of agreements are called anti-competitive agreements and they are prohibited by law, and if somebody enters into it, it would not be enforceable, it would be void, right? And then we had the concept of per se anti-competitive agreement. We went into a long discussion with it, right? And I still think some of you must have been confused with that, what it is. So basically we'll quickly revise it. You had three categories, which is the agreement, the practice, and any decision taken, right? So basically if I'm considering an impact on the market, right, you can create an impact on the market via an agreement. 2-3 people get into an agreement, okay, we will handle the market in this way, this is your responsibility, this is your responsibility, and this is the third person's responsibility, and that what they have decided, what they have agreed as per the agreement, would have an adverse effect on the competition, right? That is how we talk about the agreement. Next we move on to the practice. So over here they have not entered into an agreement, right, but generally they follow a practice. There is no written document, there is no agreement, but it's a general practice in the market. It has been established already and that is being continued, right? For example, if somebody is ruling the south zone, somebody is ruling the west zone, north zone, the others do not interfere. They are interested in their own zone, exploiting the competition in their own market, right? So that is a general practice that has come up. Third thing is about taking a decision. So for example, there are 4 entities, they form a cartel and then they decide, okay, we would manipulate the market this way. So that is a decision taken. We would keep the price at this level, or we would inflate the price by 200%, whatever be the situation, that is a decision taken, right? So an agreement, a practice, and a decision, all these 3 things can affect the market equally, right? And all these 3 will be considered under the heading agreement. These all will be considered under the per se anti-competitive agreement, right? Now what are the impacts that they do, or what are the end results that create an impact? The end result is if any agreement, any practice, or any decision is directly or indirectly determining the purchase of the sale price of any product. Number 1. Number 2 is if these agreement, practice, or decisions are limiting or controlling the production, supply, market, technical development, investment, or provision of service. Third, if these kinds of agreement, practice, or the decision, right, if they enter into an agreement, practice, or they follow a practice, or they make a decision whereby they share the market or they share the source of production, that means they divide the market geographically or something, even that is not allowed. That would be considered to be anti-competitive. And finally, if they decide to indulge into bid rigging, if they get into an agreement for bid rigging, or if it is a general practice of bid rigging or collusive bidding, then we would consider it to be an anti-competitive agreement. Now I guess it is clear with you, because in the previous class when we were discussing it, we went into a lot of discussion, right, and the definition got lost somewhere in between. That is what I felt at the end, right? So I tried to keep it crisp and short and still bringing to the point, right? So you have 4 points, 3 points of agreement, that is an agreement practice or decision. It is categorized into 3 categories. And then what are the impact? One is deciding the price, the purchase or sale price. Second is limiting or controlling the process. Third is sharing the market, and fourth is the practice like bid rigging or collusive bidding. Now you will remember it, right? And then we would be moving on to the other anti-competitive agreements. First one is the tie-in agreement. Now what is a tie-in agreement? I'll explain it to you with an example, right? So for example, A Limited is a supplier, right? Supplier of X commodity. What it does, it goes to Y Limited, right, who is the distributor in the market. So you know the hierarchy. It's the producer, the manufacturer, then the supplier, and the distributor, then the wholesaler, the retailer, and then the consumer. The general hierarchy that is being followed. So if we are going vertically through this hierarchy, right, so if there is an agreement between the distributor and the wholesaler, or the wholesaler and the retailer, whatever, right, we are going down through the hierarchy, and there are the agreement vertically between two parties. And what does that agreement say is, for example, there's a distributor, as we said, X Limited. He approaches Y Limited and he says that if you want to sell my product X, A, then you will also have to sell my product B. That means if you want, you will get both of them together, or you will not get any of them. That means now you are under a compulsion of taking B if you want A, right? Like for example, there is a famous brand of CTC tea that is pervasive in the market. So everybody wants that particular brand for their tea, right? Now what the distributor says is, because they know that it is the demand of the market, and the the wholesaler would want to earn profit, so he will distribute that product. Now he puts in a condition that if you want my tea, my CTC tea, then you will also have to sell my green tea along with it, which has no demand in the market. But this is one way that they use to promote that green tea. If you want to sell my ordinary tea, you will have to sell my green tea. So ultimately, if the wholesaler wants that tea, because there's a demand from the retailers, there's a demand from the consumers, he has to fulfill the demand, then he automatically is under the compulsion to purchase that green tea along with it and sell it. Right? Now don't you think this is wrong? You cannot force anybody to endorse any product that they don't want. The manufacturer does not want to get into distribution of green tea, but he will have to, right? Because if he denies, then he will not be able to distribute the normal CTC tea as well, and hence his business will be impacted, right? So these are tie-in agreements, right? So as per the definition, tie-in agreements include any agreement requiring a purchaser of the good as a condition of such purchase to purchase some other good as well. Right? So now do you understand the definition? It's crisp and it's clear. This is one of the simplest among all the 5. Right? Then the next you have is exclusive supply agreement. Now what is an exclusive supply agreement? Now again I will explain this to you with an example. So for example, there is just one single distributor in the market for a product, say Horlicks. Right? There is just one distributor in the market. In any small, I'm talking about any small geographical market, I'm not talking about big markets. So there's just one distributor of Horlicks. It's very much possible. Now what happens is that there is a competition that has entered, that is Bournvita, right? This Horlicks already has covered the market, and Bournvita is trying to get into the market. So what will Bournvita do is approach the distributors, the wholesalers and the retailers and distribute their products. They'll give their products to them to sell. Now Horlicks knows that this would be a big competition for me, and it does not want this competition to enter into the market. So what will it do? It will go to the distributors and the wholesalers and say, if you want to sell my Horlicks, then you will have to enter into an agreement with me that you will sell only Horlicks as an energy drink for the children. That means if there is any other drink coming in the market, you will not sell it, you will not distribute it. That is the only situation when I'll give you Horlicks. Now what is the option with the wholesaler or the distributor? Will they say no, okay, I'm okay with Bournvita? No, they can't, because they don't know whether Bournvita has a demand in the market or not, because Bournvita is new to the market and Horlicks is a product which is already in high demand. So what will they do is, for the sake of securing their business, for the sake of staying in the competition, they'll say, okay, I will distribute only Horlicks. So Bournvita is not even allowed to enter the market, because none of the distributors will take Bournvita, because they have already signed an agreement that they will sell only Horlicks. Now if any distributor at any point of time wants to distribute Bournvita, because the Bournvita manufacturer is giving them a high margin now, they will have to discontinue with Horlicks and go exclusively with Bournvita. Now there may be some who will take this up, but there are majority who will not want to take this risk. So ultimately what is happening is, it is impacting the competition. But this is not a fair mean, it's an unfair mean of pushing out the competition from the market, or not allowing your competitor to enter into the market, right? So this is an exclusive supply agreement, right? Now if you read the definition, it says exclusive supply agreement includes any agreement restricting in any manner the purchaser in the course of his trade from acquiring or otherwise dealing in any goods other than those of the seller or any other person. Right? That means if they want to deal, they will deal only in the goods of that particular seller. That is an exclusive supply agreement. Is it clear? We move on to the next. Next is exclusive distribution agreement. Now, as the term says, this is an agreement that would have an impact on the distribution, right? So what this agreement actually does, that it actually molds and manipulates the distribution in the market, which means to say that they specify the market in which they need to distribute. This agreement would restrict them with the geographical area of distribution, with the unit of production, right, with any of such things which can be related to the distribution. For example, there can be an agreement that, okay, if you are selling in this market, you will not distribute, or you may not produce more than 10,000 units of the product. That means you will not supply more than 10,000 units of the product in the market. Or if you are distributing, you will not enter the south zone, you will not enter the north zone, you will be distributing only in your west and the east zone. Leave the south and north zone blank for me. That is a kind of an agreement. Now there can be any reason behind this agreement. You will say, why will the other person enter into the agreement? There can be n number of reasons why that person will enter into that agreement, but the conclusion is that such an agreement is being entered, right? So if such an agreement is being entered whereby there is a restriction on the output or a restriction from entering into a geographical area to distribute the goods, right? So if you go by the text, it says exclusive distribution agreement includes any agreement to limit, restrict or withhold the output or supply of any goods, or allocate any area or market for the disposal or sale of the good, right? So it is very much similar to the supply agreement, right, but with a difference. So the basic difference is that over here you are hitting the distribution, you are controlling the units produced and you are controlling the units being supplied in the market. You are controlling the distribution pattern geographically, right? Next we have the refusal to deal. Now over here I would explain it to you later, but first I will read the text. I would go reverse, because once you read the text you will not understand anything. Nothing is given plain in the text that has been given by the Competition Act. The text says refusal to deal includes any agreement which restrict or is likely to restrict by any method the person or class of person to whom goods are sold or from whom goods are bought. Did you get the point, what it wanted to say? I didn't very clearly with the definition, right? But still, I know what refusal to deal means and I'll explain it to you. So basically, this if you want to remember it, just remember one word: boycott. Right? So what is boycott? This is to say that Mr. A enters into an agreement with Mr. B that I will deal with you only if you do not deal with Mr. C. You understanding what I mean to say? That means there is one particular entity, one particular market player that needs to be eliminated from the market, that needs to be eliminated from the competition, right? So what will they do? The other players in the market who are actually going with the unlawful way, right? They would approach the market players, or they would approach, again, if you see the distribution pattern, the distributors and everything, that I will deal with you only if you refuse to deal with the third person. That is refusal to deal. If you are dealing with him, I will not deal with you. That is refusal to deal. If you are distributing his product, I will not give you my product. If you are helping him, if you are giving your products to him, I will not give you my products because I don't want my products to go to him. So basically what is happening is they want to boycott any particular market player. That means unlawfully they want to impact the competition market unfairly, which is not right. Every member in the market, every player in the market should be given an equal opportunity to play. If they have some value with their product, if they have some value with the marketing, if they are actually good, they will survive. If they are not, they won't. But following unfair means to push them out of the market is not viable, is not acceptable, right? So nobody can enter into an agreement with any other person for refusal to deal, right? Just imagine there is an agreement. Mr. A enters into an agreement with Mr. B. Okay, all the other terms are well, that I'll supply this much quantity to you for this month, for this period, at this amount, and blah blah, and everything is going well. But then there is at the end one more condition, like with the asterisk terms and condition, it's a small thing written at the end. So it says that, but all the above factors will lie valid only when you do not deal with Mr. C. This is a refusal to deal agreement. That means if you are dealing with Mr. C, I refuse to deal with you. And if you want to be in the market, you better deal with me. So that is how it goes, right? So now if you read the statement, refusal to deal includes any agreement which restricts or likely to restrict by any method the person or class of person to whom goods are sold or from whom goods are bought. Right? That means if I am selling you a good or I am buying goods from you, I can render an agreement with you, an agreement which is a refusal to deal, that if I am buying from you, I will buy from you only if you do not sell it to the other person. If I am selling it to you, I'll sell it to you only if you do not buy from the third person. That is refusal to deal. Got it? Now we move on to the next. The next agreement is the resale price maintenance agreement. So what do you mean by resale price maintenance? Now again consider an example. X Limited, right, manufactures, again we'll take the example of tea. X Limited manufactures organic green tea. So if you're manufacturing something organic, that means you're not producing it in a very large quantity. Because if you want to produce organic tea in a large quantity, you need to give in the fertilizers, the pesticides and stuff, but you're not giving it. It's organic, so the production will be low. That means your cost of production is high in that case, right? Now you get that product in the market and you want to recover your cost of production, because you feel that by going through the way and by pricing the market, by pricing the product as per the demand of the market would adversely affect you. That means you will not be able to gain profit because your cost is high. So what you do is, when you go to the distributors, right, your tea is already very famous, your distributors are set. Now you go to the distributors and you say that I will stop selling you my tea now. The distributor says, why? It's a demand in the market, I have to meet the demand, I have to supply, I need certain quantities, I need these many tons of tea. But again the manufacturer says no. The manufacturer will say, I will supply you the tea only if you increase the price. Instead of 300 rupees, you sell it for 400 rupees. Right? I'm talking about 250 grams. So instead of 300 rupees, you sell it for 400 rupees. Now, if you agree to sell it forward in the market for 400 rupees, I will give it to you. Else, I will not give it to you. Now you think if you want to meet the demand, if you want to survive in the market, you will have to take. Now, what is the intention behind X Limited to inflate the price? First is because they have incurred a heavy cost of production. They want to recover it. So what they do is they would impact the consumers. They would impact the distribution, the distributors. Right? They'll say, if I'll distribute it to you only if you inflate the price, only if you sell it at this price. Because ultimately, if you're selling it at 400, earlier you were selling it at 300 and you were taking it from me on 250. Now if you're selling it for 400, you will take it from me at the rate of 340. So I'm earning 90 extra. Right? So that is this kind of an agreement, that they fix the resale price. Right? So what are the other negative impacts? That the sellers, the people who have taken the product, and if they are not allowed to sell below the certain price or even above the certain price, it is not just below the certain price, they can also fix the price. Say it is rupees 100 means rupees 100. You cannot sell more than that, you cannot sell less than that. You will have to sell it at rupees 100. So they have given it to n number of distributors in the market. So no distributor will be able to compete, because for competition what they need to do is that they need to give a discount. Now since the resale price is fixed, they cannot manipulate. The distributor has no authority to fix the prices. You say, okay, I'll give you at 1 rupee discount, you take this much bulk quantity. Now they won't be able to do that, because as per the agreement, they will have to sell that product ahead at 100 rupees. Right? So this is actually the resale price maintenance. This is how they maintain the resale price as per their desire. So these agreements are also wrong. Now if we read the text, resale price maintenance includes any agreement to sell good on condition that the price to be charged on the resale by the purchaser, that means who is the purchaser? The distributor. So if the distributor sells it further, right, then by the purchaser shall be the price stipulated by the seller, unless it is clearly stated that price lower than those prices may be charged. Right? That means who is the buyer over here? The distributor. Who is the seller? The manufacturer. Right? So the manufacturer will stipulate the price that the distributor will have to charge. Simple. And the last one you had is bid rigging, that we have already discussed. I would discuss it once again. What is bid rigging basically? In one line if we say, then it is a form of fraud whereby the commercial contract that they are actually planning to offer in the bid is already decided or contracted with one party, right? And for the sake of just appearance, several other parties are bidding in the bid. That is bid rigging. If we read the text given by the Act, given by the Competition Act, it says bid rigging means any agreement between enterprise or person engaged in identical or similar production or trading of goods or provision of service which has an effect of eliminating or reducing competition for bids or adversely affecting or manipulating the process of bidding. So from this entire statement, what I have actually explained to you is how they reduce the competition for the bids, right? But the other statements you will have to learn, right? Because ultimately it goes with the entire flow, that it means an agreement between enterprise or person engaged in identical or similar production. Obviously, if you are going to bid for some product in the market, you are producing identical or similar products, right? Or you are trading in those similar products, right? But which has an impact of eliminating or reducing competition of bids. Now, how do you eliminate and reduce the competition for bid is what I have explained, right? That the contract is already fixed and then the bidders are coming only for the sake of appearance, right? So now we are done with the provisions. Now the only thing remaining is the exemptions from section 3. right? Because all the time you cannot have this restriction, because section 3 does not specifically define any agreement that this agreement will not be allowed. No, they have given a genre of the agreement that these types of agreements will not be allowed, right? But there are certain situations where agreements have that nature and that is necessary. So over there is an exemption. For example, let us see the exemptions. So first it says that nothing in section 3 would restrict the right conferred by the Copyright Act 1957, the Patent Act 1970, the Trademark Act 1970, the Geographical Indications of Goods Act 1999, the Design Act 2000, and the Semiconductor Integrated Circuit Layout Design Act 2000. Right? Now what does this mean? This means that actually, why do you think copyright, patent, trademark, these kind of concepts come up? Why do you need a copyright for a software that you prepare, for example? Because you don't want someone else to copy that software and sell it in the market. Why do you want a trademark? That is for an identification. You don't want somebody else copying your product, right? So these acts, they had been formulated for these restrictions, right? They actually restrict the other person from attempting anything that is unlawful, right? If somebody gets his software or his work of art copyrighted, his literary work copyrighted, then why is he doing so? Because he does not want infringement. He does not want to invite any action that is unlawful, right? So ultimately what is he doing is, by entering into an agreement for that copyright, he is restricting the other person from any infringement, or he is also imposing reasonable condition which is actually necessary for protecting his rights, right? So these kinds of agreements, right, which actually impose a restriction, will be exempted from the purview of section 3, because as per section 3, as per the definition of the agreements in section 3, all these agreements will be unlawful, right? So over here there are certain places where such restrictions are necessary, and that is basically to restrain any infringement, which means they want to restrict, not these are not restrictions that would adversely affect the market, but these are the restrictions that would protect the market. They're not having adverse impact, right? They are actually protecting the market, so these will be allowed, right? And the other thing is the export of goods to the extent of agreement. Now if you have to export something, for example, if you are exporting leather bags, you will export only to that extent for which you have the agreement, for which you have the export permission, right, from the custom, for which you have the third party, the importer in the other country, you have an agreement from there, you have certain approvals. Exporting is not a very easy task, exporting and importing, right? So if any person is restricted via an agreement that may be imposed by the government himself, that you will not produce this product beyond this particular quantity, you will not supply it beyond this particular quantity, the distribution, the provisioning of services, these are controlled, right, via an agreement. So these kinds of agreement will not be considered illegal or unlawful as per section 3, right? These kinds of agreements will be allowed because that is the necessity, that is the basic sense behind it, that is the basic reason. There is a reason for that export that has been formulated for making something logical, for protecting the other things, right? So if there is something that is being done for the benefit of the market, you will not consider it to fall under section 3, right? So these were the two exemptions, and that is it. Now with this we come to an end of section 3. We have covered the entire provisions. We know what is per se anti-competitive agreement, we know the other types of agreement, we have seen the definition, we have understood the meaning with the examples, and we have also seen what are the exemptions or what are the contracts or agreement on which section 3 does not apply, right? Now what are we left with? Only the questions. So we'll pick up the questions in the next lecture, right? So stay tuned for that. Until then, it's Abhinay Gupta signing off. Thank you.